And what Danto says is most fundamental about us is that we represent the world back to it. We can't not do it. Give a child a piece of paper and a crayon, and that child will represent the world. She will paint a wee house, or a cow, or a dog, or the cat next door, and she'll show it to you. She has to do it. It's part of her humanity. She has to remake, present again the world that surrounds her. And it is an extraordinary phenomenon, this. We're all doing it. I don't know how you came here today, but if you came on the bus, you probably heard people in the seat behind you talking about their day, what they'd done. That's a work of art. They actually they represent the life they've lived, the very things that have happened to them that day. They make a wee story of it. And incidentally, a lot of novelists actually start their books by listening to people on the buses and on the trains, and they pinch their ideas, they pinch their stories. I said to her and he said to me. They pinch, and a wee story that they heard on the bus or the train will one day become a published novel, because artists borrow from other artists. Even football as a kind of basic art, I know Jim will forgive me for saying this, but the kind of endless football talk that you get on the airways and on Radio Scotland is itself a kind of art form, because they're all talking about the glories or the shame of that weekend's fixtures, and they turn it into ritual, they turn it into narrative. It's the most basic thing about us. We talk our world, we present it anew, and it's been going on for a very, very long time. I think it started when leisure became something of a problem to the human animal. I think it started when we were hunter-gatherers. Maybe 20, 25,000 years ago, we reckoned on ways of hunting animals and having enough food for a day or two or a week or two, and then we'd hole up in our caves and we'd start creating. We actually started painting the animals that we hunted on the caves in Glasgow 25,000 years ago, the south of France. Instinctively made art out of the animals that we lived off. And I imagine that sitting round the fire, we also started telling stories about the hunt. And there would be some people who were particularly good at it, the bards and narrators, and they would describe the hunt, how they went after the antelope with the spear, and as the bard was telling the story, someone would start whittling the spear itself. They'd start doing wee designs. We can't not do this. It's the way we are. It's the most instinctive thing about us. We human beings are intuitive makers. And one theory of evolution is that it's because of that we in fact evolved these big brains. We learned to play. Joseph Mika, an American human ecologist, said that play is the fundamental engine of human evolution. It caused us to take risks, to push ourselves further out on that limb. And even animals do it, but humans do it with a kind of instinctive creativity that develops. I told a wee story in one of the talks I gave at Creative Scotland, and this young woman to my left remembers the story. I live near a number of primary schools in Edinburgh, and when I go to get my paper in the morning, I see the parents taking the children to school, and the parents are hodding down, they're trudging, their heads are down. The children are skipping. They make the act of going to school a work of art. They dance their way to school, and the parents trudge, because they've lost the artistry that's instinctive and intuitive to us. In fact, Robert Hughes, a great art commentator, said that the artistic genius is someone who's able to reclaim childhood at will, diving back into the terrors and the joys of childhood and reliving it. Most of us kind of lose that as we get grown up and adult and boring and dull and worried and anxious. We lose the creative impulse. But it's the most instinctive and wonderful thing about us. And it's celebrated by people like you because you're in touch with that. Another wee theory about art I quite like. I picked this up from Rebecca West in something that she wrote about Vita Sackville West, who created a great garden in Sissinghurst in Kent, who was a great poet of the land, a strange creature, had a wonderful marriage to Harold Nicholson. They were both gay, but they adored each other and they supported each other. And Rebecca West said that great art is the abnormal justifying itself. And she meant by that a lot of really creative people are people who are out of sync with the conventional norms of society. And they in a sense, justify themselves. They make a work of art out of that dissonance. She made great gardens. She made great poetry. But think of Proust. Proust made a great work of art. He coded his own gayness into that work of art. Lots of comedians in the 40s and 50s spoke in code to each other. They had a language to communicate with each other about the status that could not be owned publicly. It took into my lifetime for that to be able to be spoken about at all. But it became great art in the lives of those who used it. They represented it into works of art. Sometimes it was comic. Sometimes there were profound pieces of art. Terence Rattigan, the great playwright, most of his stuff was coded stuff about his own gayness that could not be spoken about and owned. And it goes on. So I hope good art comes out of homophobic Africa at the moment, because they're persecuting and crucifying gay people there. And there are some very brave people trying to withstand it. I hope that out of that, maybe someday will come a great African novel about the persecution of gay people in Africa, something I've confronted myself in my struggles with the church over the years. Another little spin on what happens as a result of this. We are intuitively creative. We represent the world back to itself. Those of us who are maybe frustrated by the norms of the world turn that into great art. And what is called culture is formed. And the human is a culture-creating animal. The dogs and the cows and the camels don't create culture. They're so totally at home and embedded in the world that they simply live it, programmed almost by their instincts. But we embellish the world. We build cathedrals. We create universities. We write symphonies. We have orchestras. We paint great pictures. We write novels. We add to the world because of this intuitive, instinctive creativity. And we create enormous riches down the ages. And there's an interesting little kind of paradox here I love playing with. The people who are good at preserving the culture and the art that we have created are usually conservative people. Conservative-minded people are people who mourn the death of the goodness of the past, and they want to preserve as much of it as they can. The paradox is most of the artistic riches that they want to preserve were created by very unconservative people, by radicals. I want to quote you something from Hugh McDermott here. He said, Scottish literature, like all other literatures, has been written almost exclusively by blasphemers, immoralists, dipsomaniacs and madmen, but unlike most other literatures, has been written about by ministers. And he meant the kind with the dog collar, the kind I kind of am in a renegade way still. So you've got this lovely paradox, this balance between the conservative mind that wants to preserve the best of culture and the radical mind that actually creates it. And you've got this great kind of psychological ecology going on. And it all comes from our leisure, for the fact that time is a problem to us. Once we've created enough to eat, we've got a cave over our heads, we need to do something. We can't sleep 80% of the time the way the other animals do. When they're satiated, when they've done the hunt, they kip. We don't. We need to pass time creatively because it's a problem to us. And out of that need to pass time comes high art as well as stuff like golf. Ways of actually, that's one of the most useless ways of passing time, chasing a wee white ball all over Scotland. And I predict the time when Scotland will be one great joined up golf course, so things go on the way. And the spaces in between will be football pitches. The point I'm making here is that time is our problem, and we need to fill it creatively. You know how to do that. But let me end on a depressing note. We have created a kind of society in the West, in Scotland, in the rest of the United Kingdom, in which we have a leisured class, the unemployed, the deprived, the people and the housing schemes that are not integrated into the good things that the rest of society enjoys. We've given them absolute leisure and no capacity for using it wisely. It's one of the most terrifying and obscene paradoxes of this period in history. It used to be said that we were so clever, we human animals, that all our labour-saving devices, we would learn ways in which the work would be done by machines, and it would give us leisure and freedom to create, to be artists, to write symphonies, to paint pictures, and to climb mountains, and to make movies. And what we've done is we've created a class that works too hard and a class that can't get any work at all. And we don't give them the capacity to use that leisure. And so that leisure destroys them. They live in a desolate kind of emptiness, and they turn to all the damaging kinds of behaviour that I think are a scandal in a modern society. And it's for that reason that Systema Scotland decided to use art and creativity and music to try and embed back into these communities the capacity to use empty time creatively. And even if those kids in Raploch, and I've just come back from a trip to Caracas, in which we took 52 classical musicians from Raploch to play brilliant concerts in Caracas. And in the final concert, they got 4 standing ovations for the work that they'd done. There are now 12 children from Raploch and the Scottish National Youth Orchestra. That wee scheme, 12 children. There can't be any other postcode in Scotland. But that was a scheme that didn't produce any art. That didn't produce this kind of creativity, because it was, as it were, just subjected to the whole kind of welfare culture that we created out of a kind of misguided compassion. We know that it's not good to have these people living desolate lives, so we surround them with a kind of welfare net that actually locks them into that kind of desolation, and we're thereby not liberating the richness of their own creativity. The Systema movement, which was started in Venezuela nearly 40 years ago, decided that by building these children into the orchestra, by making them musicians from the get-go, they're not auditioned, they get their instruments, they're in the orchestra. The orchestra is a natural communist state. Everyone works together, they're all for each other, and they all recognize the talents of each other. And thereby you give those children courage and creativity and discipline and joy. And we wondered if it would work in Scotland, and so we persuaded Stirling Council 6-7 years ago to let us try it out in Raploch, where they were doing one of those regeneration schemes in the house, in the roads. And I've seen dozens of these in Scotland over the years. You do up the external infrastructure, you do nothing with the internal infrastructure, and in 10-15 years you're back where you started. And I suggested to them that maybe we should do this partnership. They would do up the external infrastructure, and we would engage with the spiritual, cultural, creative infrastructure and see if we couldn't transform the community. And my God, we have. If you watch the concert that opened the Olympics last year in a wet night in June, and no one noticed the rain, it was pissing it down, but children from Raploch were playing alongside the most famous orchestra in the world, the Simon Bolivar Youth Orchestra, and it broke people's hearts. It was so beautiful. And those children are now accomplished musicians, and the important thing is that whether they get into the economic mainstream, they will have been equipped to deal with time, to deal with the life that comes at them creatively. I think, incidentally, that they will go on to be great creators. A number of them are already demonstrating that they are musicians of genius. Two of them played with Nicky Benedetti at a carol concert in Edinburgh in December, and it broke my heart to see the two of them. Two violas and Nicky Benedetti on a violin. Who'd have thought that could have come out of Rapport 5-6 years ago? And all over Scotland there are communities like that. We are instinctive artists and creators, we humans. And if it's frustrated, we take it out on ourselves and we become desolate and destructive. So good luck and good wishes to you in your part in making Scotland a more creative, a more dramatic place. And maybe together we will help this country to start skipping again, especially our children, because they need to know how to dance that joy through the rest of their lives. That's me done. Thank you very much.